Hi, and welcome to this episode of Springdale Today. I'm your host, Mary Jordan. Today we'll be chatting with Special Education Supervisor Rachel Underdown and School Psychology Specialist Aaliyah, Chavis, and Camille Kirby about how district school psychologists are serving our students and families within our schools. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Now, I imagine psychology is very broad with a lot of specialties. Can you guys tell me a little bit about some of the unique certifications and qualifications that you have to have as a school psychologist?
Mm-hmm. So I can talk about my personal experience. So I went to undergrad and I majored in psychology, and then I applied for a school psychology master's degree, which is an educational specialist. I went to UCA and I did 2 years of school and then a year of internship. So basically like 60 plus hours.
And I kind of took a different route. I majored in psychology in undergrad at the University of Oklahoma, and I knew I always wanted to go into psychology in some capacity, and the push was clinical psychology, so more like therapeutic environments. I wanted to work in facilities, working with individuals with mental health, and so I actually went on to get my master's in clinical psychology. And somewhere along the way, I was like, a little bit burnout with doing individual and family therapy early on in my career. And I was like, there's got to be something else. And I just did a Google search and found out about school psychology. And I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of cool, like amazing. And so I joined a group and started talking about it. And then I ended up at the University of Central Oklahoma, and I finished my degree in school psychology.
Very cool. Did you want to share anything about your background?
So I'm actually not a school psychologist or a school psychology specialist. I am a special ed supervisor. My background is in special education and as a teacher. But, the realm of school psychology is super integral in Springdale and in every public school because we have laws that dictate, what we have to use for educational evaluations. And so their role is just immeasurable how much they bring to our department in special ed and just in Springdale in general.
Can you guys help us understand a little bit more about that? Maybe help dispel some misunderstandings of what your roles may or may not be within schools?
Mm-hmm. So oftentimes we get called examiners or that word testers, and we really bring so much more to the table than just doing evaluations for students. We're able to support buildings in a lot of other ways that sometimes they're unaware of just because of how traditionally the state of Arkansas has utilized school psychology specialists.
Do you guys have any idea about how many students are served by your services annually?
So, there's a lot of different ways our school psychology specialists serve students. Indirectly, their work I think indirectly touches like any kid that gets services that are around academic interventions, behavioral supports in any school building in Springdale. So, the list is really not really countable that way. But the reason that, states and federally are required to have people that have school psychology as a background is because there's a law that says that we have to make sure that we can diagnose and evaluate students for disabilities in the public school setting. And that's why, we get to have the services that they provide, directly. I think it would depend on, each building and the role of each psychology specialist that we have to really, find out what that number would be. But, I think Camille probably could give you a round number of, maybe kids that you directly served or directly evaluated last year, but it's going to, be different in every building every year.
Our ratio right now is about one school psychology specialist to about 1,200 kids, and the actual recommended ratio would be 1 to 500 according to our association. And so having higher ratios of kids that we're involved in also kind of limits what we're able to sometimes do in the buildings because that we're kind of stretched thin, and we have 21 of us among the district.
And we also like we're also different and we have different interests. Like I know me personally, I would like to do like more social skills groups in my buildings, and kind of like what they both said, we really just get seen as mainly like testing students all the time. But we went to school and we have done so much. We can provide counseling services for students, we can provide intervention services, like just so many different things that we can do besides just testing students to determine if they're eligible for special education services.
Mm-hmm.
Roles like counselors and nurses, they're within schools. They have permanent presence within our schools. What does your presence within our schools look like?
Yeah. So, we have a district-run department for special education, and under our district, we have the luxury to have contact and to be in direct services with all our school psychology specialists that we employ, and so they are district employees. However, the way that we've run and set up our system of support for them is that, usually they are attached to a building or a couple of buildings to provide support for evaluations, but also provide support for behavioral, school-wide interventions, supports even for employees. So right now, our system is set up so that each individual SPS is assigned to a couple of buildings or a caseload of, service providers and students.
How are you guys helping students toward academic success? I understand there's definitely a special education component and a relationship that exists for you, but it goes beyond that to all of our students. What can you share with us about that?
I feel like one of the biggest things or one of the biggest roles that we play a part in is response to intervention, or RTI. So, like Rachel kind of mentioned before, it's like a multidisciplinary team where we'll have like members from the special education committee there, we'll have general education teachers there, and then we also have our administration or building administration, like our school principal and assistant principal. And we really kind of just sit down, talk about the students' concerns, whether it be academic or behavior, because the district has pushed for RTI-B as well. And we kind of just talk about like what behaviors the student is displaying. If it's an academic concern, we kind of talk about like their test scores, what the teacher has done in the classroom, and then also what our interventionist has done in the classroom. And so we just kind of meet as a team, go over the data, and then we'll determine if that student, if they're just gen ed only or general education student only, if they need extra support, where they need like more intervention, or if we are basically like if that student has kind of come to a standstill with their progress in intervention, then we could possibly move forward and determine if they could possibly be a student with, a learning disability.
We've seen a rise in behaviors among children, especially at the elementary level. And so I really feel like we've been kind of boots on the ground, just trying to really help support teachers in the classroom, because it's hard. It's hard being in the trenches with those kids when they bring so much to the table and they're bringing so much when they walk through those doors. And, the teachers, they're burnt out sometimes, and it's a lot to carry with what these kids bring in. And so we really try to kind of give the support so that it gives them an outlet. It gives them some support to be like, okay, I can do this.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys have any statistical information on what the needs may look like, whether it's within Northwest Arkansas or the state or nationally?
That's a really good question.
As far as statistics, like, I don't know that any of us have all of those memorized. I do know that, we are seeing an increase in just readiness behavior for kids coming into school, being able to engage in instruction, being able to engage in the school environment. As far as our data and what we have to look at is, we really focus a lot on like referrals and students that are IEP eligible. Those numbers I think have increased just slightly, but overall, we don't see a giant increase in special ed eligibility, but we do, I think, anecdotally have a lot of data that supports that in every building across our district and Arkansas and really the U.S., the needs of our kids are not being able to be met just by one single provider at school. And, their behavioral and their readiness needs are just a lot higher. And so that's why, having school psychology specialists in Springdale is such a blessing, and the flexibility that we, have tried to design so that they can be, in schools, helping teachers, administrators, parents understand how kids develop and learn. And that really is their specialty. as a background as a special ed teacher and really not having any of that background, my knowledge is about how I can get kids to learn new skills, right? How can I teach them how to do things? I think without having that school psychology specialist on the team, they really give us the why. Like, why are there barriers in learning? How is a kid processing information? What, if they have a disability, how does that disability impact their learning? And how does it stop me as the teacher from being able to give them content they can access? So just having them in buildings and being able to inform all types of people that provide services to our kids about, how kids think, how they develop, what their relationships look like is really the best part of us having those relationships with our SPS members of that team.
You touched on something I think that's important, is that every child is not the same. What can you share with me about the diversity of learning and how that applies to what you're doing daily in our schools?
Kids come with so many different needs. They have trauma backgrounds. They may be ESL, so English language learners. They may be homeless sometimes, or maybe they're in a family that, has their needs met. And so really kind of looking at the wide array of things that they bring to the table it's stretched us. It's making us learn. It's making us grow.
Mm-hmm.
We've noticed, as the uptick in like kids needing support across the board, regardless if they have a disability or not, we've really figured out that variability in our students is the rule, right? There's a lot of kids that might have a labeled disability. There might be a kid that has autism sitting next to another kid that has been identified with having autism. They're not the same kid, right? And so their expertise just in development, just in behavioral strategies, in, taking collaborative group think to figure out how to support kids is really super imperative now, especially that we're seeing so much variability in like the way that parents support kids, the way that kids learn, the way that they access. We know kids are really good at accessing technology. When we take the technology away, sometimes they're not great at accessing verbal information or information that's on print that isn't technology based. And so, they're able to go into those schools and inform the people that are, providing that instruction for our students so that they can access the information and they can achieve what we know that they can achieve.
Mm-hmm.
How might all this be contributing to safer and positive school environments?
I feel like one of the biggest things that we have accomplished as a team, and that the district is helping us support as well, is like just inclusion overall. So regardless of whether a child is receiving special education services or not, every child deserves the opportunity to learn. So I feel like Camille and Rachel's, they have a school that they share together, and they have opened up like a new inclusion classroom at the elementary building. And I think that's something that really has like opened up the doors for us as far as like what we can do and how we can support.
What is an inclusion classroom? Can you guys share a little bit about that?
So we would hope that every classroom is an inclusion classroom, right? So any classroom that, would typically be available for a grade level, we really want to be able to have that classroom represent the kids in the community. So kids that have diverse learning needs, students that are IEP eligible, students that are 504 eligible, students that Camille said might have various backgrounds. What we want is each individual classroom to represent the population of Springdale as a whole. And what Aaliyah was mentioning was that, typically when we have classrooms that need a little bit more support, or we have a special education teacher directing a group of kids that have services, a lot of times those classes, right, are a little bit, sometimes they're disconnected from that representative population in Springdale, where they might have a couple of paraprofessionals. They might get some of their instruction in a classroom that isn't grade level. And that's required by law. We have to make sure kids are getting what they need. But we found that there's a different way to set that up, where in the building that Camille and I are both in, there are kids that are home zoned for that school, and they get their services as they need, and it's not necessarily connected to a time block in a period. It could just be that, a kindergarten student needs a little bit more support outside of the classroom. in a block of social studies. And instead of just, having those kids programmed for that big chunk of time in that setting where all the students have disabilities, we're able to really start in that gen ed curriculum, in that gen ed classroom, and then that support can be varied based on the kids' needs. So it creates a system where we know that that's the population outside of school in Springdale. And so the expectation is that if we can make sure every kid is safe, every kid is included in that gen ed classroom, and we have the supports of a school psychology specialist, teaching the teachers and the service providers what's developmentally appropriate, what is behaviorally sound. Those kids can all learn at that high level of achievement together so that when they do graduate in Springdale, that representative population is where they've learned their skills, and that's where they're going to be employed or, have those post-secondary options when they do graduate from one of our high schools.
What about coming alongside families for the times when the students aren't in school?
Yeah, Camille, I'm not throwing you on the spot or anything, but she is, just a unicorn of, skills with connecting with parents. So often our parents, come into meetings where we, find a student eligible as a committee for an IEP service, or, maybe we just have parent meetings and there's a lot of educational professionals. When they come in, sometimes they're seen as the outsider. They don't have all the information we have. Sometimes they think that, they're in trouble, that they haven't done anything, done something correctly, and that maybe is why their kid is struggling. Camille and a lot of other school psychology specialists are very good at having conversations with parents before those committee meetings happening to gather data, to connect with community resources, to connect with our social workers that we have in our buildings, our nurses, our community, just outreach personnel, so that those families feel like, oh, this is a team of people that really want to help my kid be successful. They want to help me bridge the gap between home and school. And Camille is very good at that. And I'll let her kind of talk a little bit about maybe some of the successes that you've had with, meeting with families.
A lot of times we're the first person giving them the information. And it's hard information to hear. It's hearing that your child has a disability. A lot of times they've never heard the word autism before. And so we're the first person to say, we think that your child has autism. And they're like, what is that? They don't even know what that means. And so really equipping parents became a focus for me, and letting them know they're not alone. And so I really had reached out to community resources because I wanted to know, what can I give parents? Because we say, okay, here's the label, take your child home. What next? What do I do now? And so there's an organization called Autism Involves Me, and they've been such a great resource for me, just letting me know of resources out there. And so I've been able to connect families with them, and they've been able to meet. And so even just a couple weeks ago, I sat down with the family and I said, let me make the phone call for you. That's sometimes the hardest. They don't even want to make that phone call. And I said, if you're okay with that, and they're like, please. And so I've connected families, and it's the first time that they are like, I understand this now. I feel like I can do this, because so often they're just like, what does this mean? And so, but yeah, it's been a focus for me to just really connect with these families and just letting them know, you have a team of people around you. And that's what we're often telling them in those meetings. This is your family now. We're here to rally around you. Give us a call when something goes wrong. And I have a parent still today that will still call me when she gets something in the mail that she doesn't understand, or something's happened in a clinic. She'll be like, what is this? And so that always makes me feel like as a team, we're doing something right.
It has to be valuable, too, to have a starting point when you find out something like that involving your child, just being able to know what first questions to ask and where to ask them. So I'm really grateful you guys are doing that. How does that support evolve as students grow and move through our school system?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So IDA is the law that's around, why we get to have school psychology specialists. And, we've talked about our support being, wider than just students that are IEP eligible. But part of that law talks about how we have to have a transition process that starts when students, the law says 16. In Springdale, we start that process at 14 because we want kids to have the credits they need, be ready to move post-secondary. Those evaluations are legally required to be looked at every 3 years for eligibility and programming. And so our school psychology specialists really have that connection throughout, when kids move to middle school, to junior high, to high school, and then post-secondary, they're able to help make those connections with community resources. When we look at those, data reviews, when we look at all the data that we have to, and they can really help start the conversation sometimes with parents that don't know that they can look for help with Arkansas Rehab. That's an agency that, sometimes supports adults with disabilities once they've graduated. And so that connection with parents, especially with school psychology specialists, happens throughout that kid's educational career when they're with us. And it's just an integral connection, because when they look at kids, right, for an evaluation and they determine, as a team, they're the ones that get to collect that data and present what they've found to the team, along with other members that collect data as well. We have to determine, does that student have a disability that is a school age disability, but that disability impacts beyond school, right? It's going to impact them, in home, in the community, at church, with friends and family, when they're employed. And so that connection with parents, with community, really does start with our school psychology specialists. But we hope that communication is modeled with those other team members that are there, and that continues throughout that child's secondary experience with us.
The district has weekly collaborative team meetings in which we have half scheduled for our schools, and teachers are getting together and drilling down in data and information on individual students to speak into their success. Is that something you guys are involved with as well in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just tell you what the expectation is, and I'll let them kind of tell you about those specifics. Because our school psychology specialists are team members that are connected to buildings, they absolutely are there to be able to provide any data or to interpret data that, curriculum teams find to help them figure out what is the next step for those kids in that grade level, or what's the next step for this kid that hasn't been identified with dyslexia or with a learning disability that needs support. And it might look like, hey, this profile is going to yield these results. And that's where, Aaliyah and Camille and all our school psychology specialists are vital. And I know that they, often visit those teams or are invited to talk about data. And I know that they have other things that they work on, but all of that work is around students as the center point for those conversations.
And then I think it's like once a month we also meet just like as a school psychology specialist team during CTMs. And I know I'm very appreciative of that time, because this is my 5th year, including internship year. So I'm still kind of a newbie to the game in a way. But I really appreciate like being able to sit down with like a group of us and being able to talk to some of the school psychology specialists who have more like years like within their field, to kind of see like, okay, so like what do you like to do as far as like assessments? How would you handle this situation? So it's really all just kind of like a huge collaborative process where we're able to give ideas, we're able to just gain more information about things that are going on.
We've really tried to stretch ourselves as a group of how we can better serve students. We're constantly talking about how we can grow, how we can get better, how we can focus more on areas that maybe we're weak in. Like, we try to really lift each other up so that we can best support our buildings and students.
That's a really good transition. And what can you tell me about the future? And perhaps anything innovative we may be doing within our schools that's emerging?
We're trying to grow our group and what we do, kind of like I spoke about, that we often get labeled as just like those who can come in and evaluate students, but we offer so much more, like counseling services and just collaboration. And so we've really kind of tried to stretch our group and saying, like, how can we better support students in our buildings? And so I'm recently have just kind of started looking at how I can put services on a child's IEP to help with social skills and things like that. And so, again, with our numbers, it's kind of hard to do that because we are kind of stretched all different ways. But that's something that we're kind of trying to push to see how we can better support these needs.
And in my experience, I think the connection that I have with our district SPSs is that we know that the research shows that kids do better when they're included in gen ed classes for as much time as they can be successful. And that we know that when kids graduate, if they're included in that ratio and that proportional ratio, just like the community they're living in that inclusive setting, their outcomes are better. Like the data is unequivocal there. And so we've really realized that because, it's hard to get new people hired. We're a school district, so we have to operate on, what we have and then prove if we need more and the district will support us there. So we have really strived to make sure that our school psychology specialists are seen as experts and can give lots of information to different people that directly do serve kids in a bigger capacity, so that when Camille does go into Jones Elementary, she's able to give a lot of information to teachers, to the building admin, to build supports for MTSS and, for supports for behavior, so that we don't just call the expert when there's a student misbehaving. We can teach everyone else that is with that kid to use the strategies we know are proven for kids that might struggle with behavior, or strategies that work with kids that have autism, and building capacity and working together is how we know every single kid is going to get that opportunity to be included as much as they can and have that positive outcome. And so if we keep doing the same thing where we only triage the biggest issue in the room and we call the experts in for that particular student or that particular situation, we never get out of the fact that, there's not enough people. But when we work together, we build capacity, we spread the expertise, and we teach others how to work together and how to use the best strategies. Every kid gets that opportunity to get that expertise, and we can, move forward with what we know is going to be best for kids, which is to be in that gen ed classroom and be with their peers as much as they can.
I wonder if any of you have any personal experiences or anecdotal moments that you could share where you've seen the impacts of your work and you've seen how it's affected a child or a student. Is there anything you'd like to share with us?
I have a story of a student that I worked with last year. So he was really struggling in the classroom with paying attention and focusing, and he just could not control his body. So we got permission from his mom for me to be able to kind of just talk to him every 20 minutes for maybe twice a week. And so there was this activity that I did with him that was from the Gap Relief, because we also collaborate with them. They're amazing. And so it was basically a blank picture of a gingerbread man. And so I was like, hey, I want you to tell me what your body feels like, but I want you to draw it. So we sat down and I gave him colors. I gave him his blank gingerbread and I just talked to him as he colored. And so he was like, okay, Miss Aaliyah, I'm done. And the gingerbread was rainbow. And so I was like, okay, talk to me about this rainbow and how this relates to your body. And he was like, well, do you know Sonic? And I was like, yes, I know Sonic. He was like, well, when he's feeling really he needs to go and he's just feeling really fast, his body goes hypersonic, and that's how my body feels. So he was a first grader last year, and the fact that he was able to describe that to me just based off of his picture was amazing. And so I was able to share that with his teacher and also with his mom as well. And she was like, okay, well, it kind of makes sense because we're seeing that his body is going through these things, but it's way better visually to be able to see that. And so because of that, the teacher was able to put in more accommodations in the classroom for him, and his mom also kind of gave him a little bit more grace too, because he was like, Mom, I really cannot control my body. But I feel like that was my best, or one of my best personal stories from last year.
That's great. That is. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? And we've talked about quite a bit today. Is there anything I haven't thought to consider as part of the conversation that you think would be valuable to mention? No?
I do think that I know Camille, I'm going to tell a story for her. I think the best thing about having, different people and experts that get to, work with building teams is that, Aaliyah kind of mentioned it. We have a building that really wanted to try, making sure that the forefront of their decisions for kids were how much can we include these kids and how we can start with inclusion in gen ed and then add supports as we go on. And just the amount of dedication that I think Camille has had in that building and the relationships that you've built with adults. Sometimes we always, we talk about kids because that's why we're here, right? But sometimes what we don't remember to plan is relationships with adults so that when things do get hard, those adults know where to reach. And I think in every one of Camille's buildings where she's at, she's able to make those really strong relationships with adults so that when their tank is empty, they can pick up the phone, call Camille, tell her about what is woeing them or what has happened. And she's able to give really reflective, great listening time, but also some great advice about how, what matters is the kid. And so sometimes it is all about the kid, but sometimes it's about planning for capacity for adults. And I think when everybody is supporting everybody in our school district, kids win every time. So, I don't have like a personal story about a student for her, but there are many times that I know that Camille has saved the day by answering the phone and just giving adults in our district that are working as hard as they can the space to tell her how they feel or to tell her the successes that they've had. And I think part of the reason why that school has been so successful in leading inclusion in our elementary schools is because they have people to call when they're struggling. And I know one of the first people they call all the time is Camille.
She's amazing. I still call her.
It sounds like my intern.
It sounds like a lot. And I hope someone is there supporting you guys, just like you're supporting us. So thank you for everything you're doing. And thank you for coming and talking to us today and sharing more about your story and how you're supporting your families. We're very grateful for everything you shared today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. I'm Mary Jordan, your host, and we look forward to talking to you more in the future about what's happening in Springdale today.
Springdale Today is a production of Springdale Public Schools Communication Office.
The podcast is hosted by Mary Jordan and is produced and edited by Micah DeLacy.
Be sure to subscribe to Springdale Today for free on your favorite podcast platform.
And don't forget to follow Springdale Today on social media for episode updates and behind-the-scenes conversations.
Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us in the future
as we continue to learn about the amazing stories happening in Springdale today.